Japan's decision at the Battle of Khalkhin Gol was a total blunder that changed the course of history, and I'm about to break it down for you. In the late 1930s, Japan was on a mission to expand its empire. The invasion of Manchuria in 1931 was just the beginning, and the Japanese army was hungry for more conquests. The Battle of Khalkhin Gol in 1939 was a crucial moment in Japanese military history with far-reaching consequences. In 1939, the Japanese army was at the height of its power, with a well-trained and well-equipped force that had been battle-tested in China. But despite its strength, the Japanese military had a crucial weakness. Its strategic objectives were often at odds with the realities on the ground. This disconnect would prove disastrous for the Japanese army at Khalkhin Gol. Moving on to the strategic objectives of the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, Japan's primary goal was to secure the Nomonhan region, a vital strip of land that connected Mongolia to Manchuria. The Japanese army believed that control of this region would give them a strategic advantage over the Soviet Union and allow them to expand their empire further. But the Soviet army, under the command of General Zhukov, had other plans. General Zhukov was a brilliant military strategist who had a deep understanding of the Mongolian terrain. He knew that the Japanese army's weaknesses lay in its over-reliance on cavalry and its lack of mobility in the face of Soviet armor. Zhukov planned to use his artillery and tank divisions to devastating effect, pinning down the Japanese army and preventing them from advancing. As we'll see, Zhukov's plan would prove to be a masterstroke. The Japanese army, led by General Michitaro Komatsubara, was confident in its ability to defeat the Soviet forces. But Komatsubara's tactics were deeply flawed, and his army was ill-prepared for the battle ahead. The Japanese army's intelligence reports underestimated the strength of the Soviet forces, and their reconnaissance missions failed to detect the Soviet army's buildup of troops and equipment. As the battle approached, the Japanese army began to dig in, constructing defensive positions and laying minefields to slow down the Soviet advance. But the Soviet army was not to be underestimated, and it launched a series of probing attacks to test the Japanese defenses. The Japanese army held firm, but at great cost, and the Soviet army's constant pressure began to take its toll. On August 20th, 1939, the Soviet army launched a massive offensive, with tanks and artillery pounding the Japanese defenses. The Japanese army fought bravely, but it was vastly outnumbered and outgunned. The Soviet army's superior firepower began to tell, and the Japanese lines started to waver. Meanwhile, Japan's tactical decisions continued to hamper its chances of victory. The Japanese army's reliance on cavalry meant that it was slow to respond to the Soviet army's rapid advances. The Japanese Air Force, which had been expected to play a crucial role in the battle, was largely ineffective, and its bombers failed to make a significant impact on the Soviet army's supply lines. The Soviet offensive was relentless, and the Japanese forces were unable to hold their ground. The geography of the battlefield also played a crucial role in the outcome of the battle. The Mongolian terrain was harsh and unforgiving, with rugged hills and deep rivers that made it difficult for the Japanese army to maneuver. The Soviet army, which was familiar with the terrain, used it to its advantage, luring the Japanese army into ambushes and killing zones. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Japanese army was in trouble. Its lines were crumbling, and its soldiers were beginning to surrender in droves. The Soviet army pressed its advantage, pushing the Japanese army back and encircling its forces, sealing their fate. In the end, it was not the Soviet army's superior numbers or firepower that won the battle, but the Japanese army's own mistakes. Its over-reliance on cavalry, its lack of mobility, and its poor intelligence had all contributed to its defeat. The Japanese army had made a huge mistake, and it would pay the price for its arrogance and complacency. The pivotal moment in the battle came when the Japanese army's strategy faltered, and its commanders realized that they were no match for the Soviet army. The Japanese army had been so confident in its own abilities that it had underestimated the Soviet army's strength and determination. As the reality of its situation dawned on the Japanese commanders, they were forced to retreat and regroup, marking a significant turning point in history. The consequences of the Japanese army's defeat were severe. The battle had been a disaster, with thousands of Japanese soldiers killed or wounded. The Soviet army had emerged victorious, and its prestige had been greatly enhanced. The Japanese army's defeat at Khalkhin Gol had also changed the course of history, as we'll see in a moment. The Battle of Khalkhin Gol was a watershed moment in Japanese military history. It marked a turning point in Japan's military strategy and forced its leaders to re-evaluate their priorities. The battle had shown that the Japanese army was not invincible and that its weaknesses could be exploited by a determined opponent. This realization led to significant changes in their future military engagements. In the aftermath of the battle, the Japanese army regrouped and reorganized, determined to learn from its mistakes. It would go on to make significant changes to its tactics and strategy, abandoning its reliance on cavalry and focusing on more modern forms of warfare. The battle had been a hard lesson, but it had ultimately made the Japanese army stronger and more resilient. This transformation marked a turning point in their military history. So what do you think, folks? Did Japan make a huge mistake at the Battle of Khalkhin Gol? Share your opinions in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And let us know what topic in history you want us to cover. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more brilliant videos like this. Let's keep history alive. This is History Replay. This day,